Right, joining us is a guest, Professor Swaran Singh joins us. Professor Singh teaches at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Professor Singh, welcome to DD India News Hour. How would you rate or assess Trump's day one in office? Did it go according to your expectations? Were there any surprises there at all for you?
I think, Ramachandran, fundamentally it applies to all elected leaders that the high shrill speeches during electioneering see it toning down once the leader takes power, and to some extent that is noticeable. For example, even before his inauguration, he had a phone call with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, was trying to ensure that Xi Jinping comes to his inauguration, and the kind of orders that he's issuing now. Two things I think we need to keep in mind. One, Kash Patel, who's now the director of FBI, wrote a book, full book last year about it's interestingly titled "Government Gangsters," where he talks about how deep state in United States disallowed President Trump during his first term to fully implement his policies. So deep state has not completely disappeared in that sense. So implementing each of these will also see certain, progression, what speed that happens on the ground. We'll have to see. Second, many of these orders will also mean that the states of United States will have to also participate in implementing some of these decisions. And the United States is a very strong federation, and in that sense, it's not as simple as president wanting to implement something and states will verbatim follow every part of it. So some of those will also may see certain hiccups in certain areas.
Right.
Now, he had promised so much in advance, created that whole hype. He did sign several executive orders, particularly revoking all the executive orders of President Joe Biden. I think that's a very interesting.
Yeah, talking about executive orders, Professor Singh, what did you make of those executive orders that Trump signed? What stood out for you from among the many decisions that he announced there?
I think some of the rather regressive ones that I think should be noticed is the one on gender, where he's kind of talking about only two genders to be recognized in the United States. Similarly, executive order again that talks about no longer following all these inclusive policies and yardsticks, benchmarks, etc. in all United States decision making, etc. Sending military to the southern border, I think that's another rather sort of offensive exercise with the immediate neighbor. Of course, Paris Climate Change Treaty is another one which is interesting. So basically, doing partly what he was saying, also, for example, of order against immigrants and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But each of these will have to be implemented on the ground. So I don't think that American armed forces are already deployed on southern border as we speak. So these things will have to follow, and we'll see how efficiently these things actually happen on ground.
Professor Singh, having heard Trump's inaugural address, having seen the decisions he has announced by way of executive orders, what should India and the world expect from Trump 2.0? Do we have a fair idea of where things are headed going forward?
Something that every commentator has been talking ad nauseum is to say only thing predictable about him is his unpredictability. Mm-hmm. But if we have to still look at what is likely to happen, I think it's a big shift that we will notice. That's what is being called the new era, where United States is no longer interested during his presidency on how to maintain global order that would ensure United States global leadership, rather focus narrowly on prosperity and security within US borders. So that's a big change that we will notice. And the spin-off of that will be his relative disengagement, disinterest with all the global arrangements. We saw 5 of them that he had walked out during his first term. And NATO could be coming under certain stress, which again undergirds American global leadership in that sense. So in that sense, does it mean that either those global arrangements will become less effective over a period of time because he prefers bilateral rather than multilateral? Or we will see new actors, European Union, European states, India could be one among them, to take on the increased responsibility in ensuring how do we deal with global challenges, whether it is transition to green economy, which again he's not interested, how to deal with fossil fuels that he's trying to increase, tariffs, another major issue that he's been constantly been talking about, and some of the tariffs might go up again. But something will come out in the sense that other nations will step in if United States does what he's been saying he will be doing in terms of raising tariffs and so on. And he will of course need the partnerships as well, and he has to look at who could be potentially his partners. I think if NATO is under strain, China and Russia are not going to be potential partners, then India would stand some possibility, of course, with a lot of hiccups because he wants to manufacture everything in United States. But because India is now almost notorious, I should say famous, for very low cost production, I think, in high technology areas. And if United States production has to become competitive around the world and not depend simply on tariffs, then I think certain possibilities of coordination, cooperation, partnership with India in certain sectors could be a potential area. I think Elon Musk, who's a very influential player in the game, I think is interested in India in a big way. So that could be something where India could explore. I'm sure India is already working in that direction. So I think in that sense, the fact that India has been able to implement some of these technologies at a very large scale, showcasing that there is enormous amount of experimentation of how technologies are used on the ground, and the cost effectiveness of technologies production from India could make India an interesting player. And of course, his focus on Indo-Pacific makes India a very important strategic partner that he said many times. So again, there are areas of geopolitics and production and manufacturing which could see India building closer partnerships with the United States during his term.
Absolutely. Professor Singh, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Trump has repeated anybody from his previous cabinet, not even his own family members, including son-in-law Jared Kushner. So it's an all-new team Trump, as it were, new faces in his cabinet. What did you make of his cabinet picks, in particular Marco Rubio for Secretary of State and Mike Waltz for his National Security Advisor? Can we expect change with continuity?
I think, Ramesh, it's going to be focused much more on experience and maturity of people he's choosing. And of course, there is a certain view that maybe many of these are hawks on China. They are the China phobes, if you want to call them. That is one kind of common thing. And they are also not just because of China, but in general, they are soft on India. And then, of course, people of Indian origin being a part of his team and so on, will showcase that this time he's been far more, let's say, professional, far more objective in making choices. I am sure that Rubio will not be repeating what we saw during last term. The Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was very vehemently vocal against China. He used to talk about Chinese party being separate from Chinese people, was pushing Quad to become Asian NATO and so on. Chinese were paranoid during that time. Marco Rubio may be more subtle, I suppose, in his engagement with China and India, even if he's pursuing same national interests as Trump would expect him to do. A more subtle approach, I suppose, we could see both from Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio this time.
I want to get some more perspective from you on the Indo-Pacific. Professor Singh, you referred to the China hawks in Trump's new cabinet. Can Trump be expected to maintain a sharp focus on Quad and the Indo-Pacific? Because it was Trump who revived the Quad in 2017, let's not forget.
Indeed, actually, if you remember all the important reports that came out during his first term, whether it was nuclear posture review, national security strategy, Indo-Pacific framework, had focused very clearly that for United States, it is China that was the challenge number one. And during President Joe Biden, we saw it drifting towards Russia becoming the major challenge. So we are definitely going to go back on China again being seen as number one challenge for United States. You remember Indo-Pacific framework had underlined that China not only has intention, but also capabilities to challenge US leadership in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think the focus is going to come back to Indo-Pacific very clearly and on Quad in that sense, which would make India a very significant partner for United States. Of course, India has its own outlook towards Indo-Pacific. We have seen that India has said repeatedly we don't want to see this region getting militarized. But you remember that President Trump also is not interested in sending troops abroad and engaging in foreign wars. He's going to use much more technology tools, much more economic tools to undertake a strategy of coercion if he has to. So in that sense, we will see much more blending of Indian approach on Indo-Pacific with United States approach, where he's not looking at putting any military pressure or military deployments as part of his strategy to contain or deal with China. And if China is going to be number one concern, definitely Indo-Pacific will become priority, and then India would become kind of a closer partner in the Indo-Pacific, which is repeatedly said by President Trump himself.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I will have to leave it at that. Professor Singh, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.